Thank you. Let me ask a little follow-up of that for Mr. Phillips, who works with real estate firms all over the world. And a lot of what the Urban Land Institute does is to share best practices, both from the home country of developers and investors, as well as in the source countries. And I know that something you're interested in is how there can be commonality, how there can be frameworks here. So you look at these situations all over the world. Some are successful, some are less successful. There are lots of challenges, and I was wondering if you can talk about some of those challenges, in particular some of the ways in which a trade association can help look at best practices, which I presume have to do with benchmarking, clarity, and transparency. Do those kind of things matter in your experience?
Yeah, they do, John, and I'm happy to address them. ULI, the Urban Land Institute, does in fact catalog best practices from around the world, and we try to share information about what works and what doesn't, and what mistakes are made and what lessons are learned. And we've been doing that for about 75 years. This whole topic, though, of public-private partnerships is an area that I was personally involved with for many years before heading ULI. And as you put it, John, I think clarity and transparency is a fundamental component. Mr. Go mentioned it as well as Mr. Tu. I think it goes hand in hand with some other characteristics of public-private initiatives that are successful. In our experience, urban development really always is a public-private partnership at some level. It can be a simple matter of the public sector setting the ground rules and investing in infrastructure, and the private sector coming in and marshaling the capital and the other resources required to implement projects. Or it can be very complex with co-ownership or complex leases or complicated capital stacks. More often lately, it's tending toward the latter. But no matter what the format of the public-private partnership, it ultimately comes down to some combination of three techniques. You can either use the partnership to reduce the capital cost of the project to the private sector partner. You can reduce the operating cost, or you can reduce the risk. The land value is often the biggest variable and the most powerful variable in terms of making a project feasible. So often you see a land subsidy in effect of some sort that reduces the capital cost. There's also infrastructure cost sharing and the like. On the operating side, there's tax incentives or energy savings arrangements or other means to reduce the operating costs and therefore increase the net income available to provide a return. But the third category, reduction of risk, is what's really related to clarity and transparency. And I think that the reduction of risk has a dramatic impact on the development economics of the project. By commanding a lower risk premium, the project's economics can support a higher level of capital and operating cost and can really close the gap much more effectively. So when the public sector partner is clear and transparent in the structure that governs the project, it can have a powerful economic effect beneficially to the project. It's not about controlling the project or controlling the relationship less, it's just establishing a set of well-understood rules that are consistently applied. Increasingly, we're seeing structures that set a project initiative from the public side somewhat apart from the government. And that's an attempt to insulate the project from the short-term political cycles that inevitably can affect projects otherwise, and to establish continuity over a longer period that's much more in keeping with the capital and time-intensive nature of development. So, yeah, clarity and transparency is pretty important in these kinds of things. So is leadership, and I could come back to that later in response to a question that I expect you'll ask, John.
Thank you. I actually wanted to ask you a different follow-up, if I could, Patrick. You started out early on saying that there's more and more complexity in the capital stack, or in the layer of investors and mezzanine investors and bondholders and banking and all that. And then you went on to talk about risk. And the session before this was about resilient cities. And resilient cities don't just talk about risk in terms of stock betas, the way that somebody would in the capital asset pricing model, but real risks like floods and pestilence and things like that. Do you see the players in the capital stack accepting different returns because somehow they negotiate different ways to absorb some of those risks?
Yes, I think that we see that in the differing rates of return that the various sources of capital are requiring, so that there are ways to either establish a preferred position or to some other way insulate yourself from certain kinds of risks. The physical risks that you mentioned in terms of whether it's climate change related risk or catastrophes related to earthquakes or similar kinds of disasters, I think are more challenging. When I think about resilience and resilient projects, resilient cities, I think about the ability to withstand shifts in the economy and the emergence of new technologies that can render more rigid development patterns obsolete. So I think about things like infrastructure patterns that can accommodate a change in development markets over time so that uses can shift and projects can be more nimble and more adaptive.
Great, thank you.